Hi, I am Edward Ero, and I'm the TCBC Bike University Coordinator this year. Our speaker tonight is our own Doug Nelson. Doug has long been active with the American Youth Hostels, which became the Hosteling International, which the Twin Cities Bicycle Club spun off from in 1993. He has been the editor of the Hosteler, later the TCBC News since 1979. Doug has been witness to really much of the TCB history by attending most of the Ironman, Watermelon, Weekend on Wheels, and all club rides that were held. He has also biked more than 1,000 club miles a year for 40 years. Doug has been called the club's unofficial historian due to his role as the long-term editor of the TCBC News. He has what he calls is a pretty good sense of our history. And so Doug will work to present it in an informative way. He will use a few quotes from the newsletters that have been written over the years, and will try to distinguish between historical facts and some opinions. Many members have been around for some or most of the TCBC history, and you will have your own recollections and interpretation, and that's great. So let's get back to the past for a little while and see how our club, TCBC, was developed. Doug?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. You're going to see some old style jerseys and stuff tonight, like this, one of my favorites. Now, I know it's a sacrifice being here. I know we'd all be rather watching young Sheldon right now, but I appreciate it. And some of you will hear stuff you've never heard before because you haven't been around that long. And a lot of it's good, and there's a few things that are interesting looking back at now. Let's just put it that way. So I did research, I went through newsletters, I went through my memory, always a tricky business, and let's get to it. And there's a bonus. In a minute, there is a bonus. I know you'll be a great audience and maybe learn a few things. Let's see, a few things will be my opinions, but only a few, including, yes, the one big controversy we have had in our history, which I will reluctantly talk about. I will do a basic history, then I'll go back and just focus on specific subjects like Ironman, Watermelon, Weekend on Wheels, unforgettable characters. I do not do PowerPoint, as some of you probably know. Just to break up the flow, I will hold up a few exhibits for you to see in front of the screen. I wish I had kept a few more. And now for our special treat. A few days ago, Lyle, who is here with us, sent me some old slides from the 80s. And this is not going to be a big slideshow, this presentation. We are just going to show some old 80s slides, and I'll make a couple comments on them, and you can see what some of us were doing back in the 80s, and we looked a little different. So Edward, if you would not mind, he knows how to do this and I don't.
Will do. There you go.
Okay, this is one of our trips, I think, up to Timberlake Lodge from Maplewood Mall. And yes, that guy in the lower right-hand corner is somehow me. Also on there is Pete and Kathy Hawkins and Lyle and a few other familiar characters, some of which aren't with us anymore, but Doug and Linda Peterson. Lauren Stark is right behind me. Oh my goodness. I think that's him. Anyway, next slide, please. And John Raines and his son, Ben. Some of you remember them. And gosh, that looks like me chowing down. Next. I would say that looks like Pete and Kathy at the famous waterfall in Osceola, doesn't it? And I hiked there last summer. It's still great. Next.
Oh, so cute.
Again at Maplewood Mall. Gee, watermelon. I wonder where that idea went to. Next.
Everybody please be on mute except Doug. Thank you.
Oh, my picture's on there.
Well, you know, it's all about the food. I'm not sure where this was. It might have been Timberlake Lodge. Next. I used to lead an annual trip in the summer to Hidden Valley Campground near Welch on the Cannon River, and this was one of those trips. I can't really tell who anybody is, but you will see somebody on the next one next. Jeannie Papin, one of our former presidents, was my co-leader and cook that year. Thank you, Jeannie. That campground, by the way, closed a few years ago. Next. Okay, let's look at Lyle with his great old bell helmet and Bob Hoffman with that silly old mustache that he had, and also Becky and Linda. Next. We also had a canoeing program, as Pete certainly remembers, and there is definitely Mel Peterson staring off near the camera. Next. Okay, very interesting, Pete, whatever you're doing with bare feet there. Very good. Next. I know where this is. We used to do the Split Rock Century, and that's Pete and Linda on the overlook above Lake Superior. Next. I don't know where this is, but some parks have a cannon, and that is Scott Wetterland in the middle, who we have not heard from for quite a while, but good to see him again. Next. Oh, Bob, who needs a tent? I mean, really, you know, let's just be casual. Although if you look closely, it looks like the forest right behind him is kind of on fire. Next. And let's see, Becky, Lyle, Stefan, not Stefan. Yeah, Stefan and Becky. I might be wrong on that one. Next. Hack Remington, who was the father of Bob Remington, the father of Pat Remington, who were very active in the late 70s when some of us started getting active. Next. And Becky trying to figure out what's going on. Becky Jackson was also a former president. Next. Hey, now don't they look almost like they know what they're doing? Almost professional. Pete and Becky looks very good wherever that was. And I think we're about at the end. Next. Looks like an old tandem. Is that Lyle and Linda? Don't know what ride that was, but that was the good old days. Next. I think that was the last one.
I think that's it.
Okay, thanks. Hope you guys got a kick out of some of that real old stuff. So back to me. Some of these things I'm going to say you might know, some maybe you never heard. Luckily for our club's 25th anniversary 4 years ago, I put together some historical articles, so that really saved time in research. And hey, it's winter. There's time for this stuff. So going way back, in spring 1978, I did a bike trip in Europe with a friend, usually staying in hostels, which are, and I think still are, or were, low-cost accommodations for traveling people to stay, often involving bunk rooms, and doing at least one chore. Back then, there were 4,500 hostels worldwide. Our newsletter mentioned that AYH is based on the concept that outdoor travel should be healthful, inexpensive, fun, and a learning experience. Usually traveling under your own power. Our trip to Europe was a real eye-opening experience. It was probably my least planned trip ever. I've gotten much better at it since then, and it sure helps having the internet now, doesn't it? Back home in the Twin Cities, I started getting mailings from American Youth Hostels, the Minnesota Council, the local group. They had a few hostels in Minnesota and Western Wisconsin, and the Metro group offered mainly bike rides. I did some that year, including my first century, which I was not ready for. Oh, the pain, the memories. That winter, the council had some financial problems and they had to let the executive director go with no advance notice, really. So what were the odds that I, as a recent journalism school graduate, had already been shown how to put their newsletter together before the executive director left? They asked me to start doing it, so that's what I've been doing since 1979. A long time ago and lots of changes. It's so much easier now. So AYH was known for running the Minnesota Ironman ride. I got more active. I took leadership training in '81, the year before the class, including Bob Hoffman and Pete May. I led rides. I always managed to do our big rides, the Ironman, the Watermelon, and wow. I often went to board meetings. I've experienced much of the history and I've read each newsletter, as you might guess. So let's focus on the club. 1980, we had a good bike schedule. And on the leader list then, who do you think is the only person leading now? Of course, Pete Hawkins. There were some overnights and even time trials and some non-bike events, as you saw on the slides, canoe and even cross-country skiing. Helmets were still optional, not required for everyone on club rides until 1994. Looking back, that was way too slow. A computer man named Wojtek had the club start making trip reports. He input them himself into the computer for years. So that's how we could see who was the most active, doing the most miles. This has evolved into our current ride stats program. The first awards recognition banquet had already been held the previous year, 78, and happened every year until COVID, well, in person. So that year, 1980, we had 95 total events. Back then, that seemed pretty good, 95 in a year. The early 80s included a famously offbeat writer called Dr. Fix-It, who gave wacky and involved answers to bicycling questions, and even won a humor award from the League of American Bicyclists. Occasional social events called spoke tunes and slideshows. Pete May started providing cartoons for the newsletter, thank goodness. The Halloween ride started up, which was a house-to-house ride for many years with food at every stop. The Paul Bunyan Double Century ride from Anoka around Lake Mille Lacs and back in one day. Bob Hoffman and I put out the second edition of the Bike Atlas in 1983. Here it comes. The famous, oh, can't block myself too much. The famous pink cover. Yes, from Pete May. Bob hand drew the maps, if you can believe it, and I typed the text on my typewriter. I had forgotten something. I recently learned that, you know, we give Shelby Miller much deserved credit for being president 4 straight years, but in the late 80s, a woman named B.J. Carlson was president of the council 4 straight years. Very, very impressive for both of them. So, 1989, the council's first executive director since 79 was hired. His name was Tim. There was a strong focus on efforts to create an office/permanent year-round hostel in the metro area. More than 30 sites were checked out, but found unsuitable. Tim left after 1 year, and a woman named DK replaced him. I know it is childish, but some of us became reluctant to say her name out loud as time went on. So I will continue that tradition even now. A hostel fund challenge began, and members were strongly encouraged to donate money. As one quote read, "The majority of our members did not join AYH to bike. They joined to travel." In '91, the AYH board committed considerable resources to building an organization that could support both hostels and educational programs. Things started to change. Newsletter issues were combined to save money. Some newsletters were late. The perception grew among many bicycling members that the council did not care much about the bicycling program. By then, around 300 bike rides a year were taking place. The next year, a St. Louis Park building was selected for the proposed Metro International Hostel. A phone bank was set up for a telemarketing fundraising campaign. And yes, it's 1992. Things are changing. The Hosteler now became a quarterly publication with the office staff putting it together. The activity news became a monthly issue focusing on rides and trips with me as the editor. People had to request to get on its mailing list, which was not large. To quote my article, and yes, I do have to quote myself sometimes from back then, "Business as usual may not be possible anymore due to increasing financial and insurance pressures." End quote. Things came to a head at the infamous AYH annual meeting, November 1st, 1992. Have any of you there been able to forget it yet? Not. Pete's shaking his head no. I figured he would. It lasted past midnight. There were at least 50 people there at the very bitter end. Quote from my article, "There was some name calling, nastiness, procedural ploys, many points of view, ... Attending this meeting discouraged some new members and may have stunned some board members now that they are more aware of the hornet's nest of issues," unquote. There were votes on terminating the hostel project and ending the contract of DK. Both those votes failed. Drink to that. Okay. So in the same issue where I wrote the story I just mentioned, I also wrote that I was resigning as the editor in what for me was a surprisingly emotional article, even looking back at it now. I admit now, I was kind of whining. Quote, "Our ED told me she considered herself the executive editor, and we had many disagreements about what to print and what to emphasize, ... In the last year and a half, my insides have gradually been ripped apart, much as AYH has," end quote. Now I can say, wah, wah, wah. But believe me, it was painful times. So the story you may not know, soon after that issue came out, I went to the AYH office one day to get something or do some newsletter stuff. I did have a key. When I figured no one would be there, well, guess what? I couldn't get in. DK was upset enough at what I had written that she had changed the locks to keep me out. So we didn't communicate much after that. Our bike committee, thank goodness, that fall was inspired to come up with a great idea. We could spin off as an AYH hostel club. It was perfectly permissible under the AYH bylaws. We could become a semi-independent activity club just focusing on biking. The AYH board approved it. The word spread. TCBC's first annual meeting was held March 20th, 1993 at Minnetonka City Hall with about 75 people. The meeting was a success. John Miller briefly explained the TCBC structure with a handout he wrote called, with his sardonic sense of humor, TCBC for Idiots. And I'm holding it up. I know you can't read it, but this actually is the original John creation from 1993 that helped us spin off. Also in my hand, oh, can't jump ahead, get to that in a minute. TCBC would have its own budget, its own checking account, and an independent newsletter. The club would maintain its own mailing lists, have its own PO box, and run the biking program. Let me list the original 9-person operating committee, at least a few of whom have passed on. John Miller, Pete Hawkins, Paul Grissom, Tom Devine, Kathy Duckenfield, Don Dilla, Bob Stimpson, Paul Ross, and myself. This was approved. They convinced me to continue as the editor, and I learned how to lay out the newsletter at home. From John Miller, quote, "After some discussion, we decided that Twin Cities Bicycling Club, though pedestrian, was the best name for our club, as our members mostly live and ride in the Twin Cities," unquote. We upgraded our newsletter. Here is the last one, which we called the activity news back then, in newsprint. And believe me, it was a nice change because here was our first one in paper stock and also much better for ads. So I know you can't really see it that well, but it was nice looking at these again for me. We got a TCBC logo. Things went well. That summer we had 500 memberships, 76 active ride leaders. We kept running plenty of rides. And in case you were wondering what I said a few minutes ago, to finish part of the story, the St. Louis Park Hostel never did happen. And the contract of DK was terminated that summer. As I wrote this, I couldn't help thinking of this is I don't know, I have this character around the house you might recognize, and it comes in helpful sometimes when dealing with life. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Out of curiosity, while researching this speech, I looked up Hosteling International on the internet, which I haven't looked at really for years. There used to be hundreds of hostels in the United States. Now there are about 30 listed. The nearest is in Chicago. Obviously, COVID and other factors have changed the situation from what it used to be. So that is the winter of 92, 93. And that wasn't even our big controversy. That's still coming in a few years. Just wait. We'll get there. A few other highlights from our first big year of being our independent club. The participation year was set to start each November 1st. Hey, it still is. And to be an eligible ride, there needed to be 2 participants in addition to the leader. Members paid $1 fees for every day ride they went on. With the internet still not a big thing, we had an activities hotline phone number listing upcoming events. And here it comes, our first TCBC jersey. Are you ready? Let's see. Purple, blue, and white. Some people commented it looked like a tire track was running over the jersey. That was not the intention at all. But I bet not many of these remain, but somehow mine has still survived all this time. Yay. So I thought you might get a kick out of that. And believe me, there's more jerseys to come. I'll show you just a couple more. That year, 370 rides. Let's go further into the 90s. As I mentioned, helmets finally became mandatory for all rides. We got our first leader liaison. We started the all club ride. By 98, we had about 1,000 household memberships. And that year for the polar bear ride on New Year's Day, it was so warm, we had 100 riders on New Year's Day. I know, freaky. It happened. Things were going well. Then came 1999, the year of pain, confusion, change, threats of lawsuits. This is the part of this presentation I wrote last because it still hurts. And you thought back then we were just worried about Y2K? All right, hold on a sec. For some strange reason, I have kept some of the paperwork from 99 and I have it in my hand. I'm not going to let you see it because you don't really need to, but it does really help. Somehow, I guess I must have known I would need it again someday, although it takes me no pleasure in looking at it. Here goes. I will use very few names. Early that year, a joint task force subcommittee was set up with AYH, also known as Hosteling International, but I will just keep saying AYH because it's more consistent. Also, a new club from TCBC members was incorporated called Hiawatha Bike Club, named after Longfellow's poem and also the Milwaukee Road Railroad train. Most TCBC members were not members of AYH, although leaders had to be. The club had no legal existence because it was an AYH committee. AYH controlled all the club's finances. AYH had to approve any check the club wrote for more than $500. TCBC wanted different insurance on our rides. So many in the club at this point wanted full independence from AYH, especially since we were confident in doing things like bike atlases and big organized events. And we'd be able to buy insurance from LAB. So things went on that year. AYH made an offer. The TCBC subcommittee made changes to their initial agreement because at first it sounded like we were in good track, good shape. But then there was changes. Some would say demands. There was, quote, continued abusive and inflammatory language, unquote. The lawyers were seriously involved, a number of lawyers. Insert lawyer joke here, whichever one you like. In September, AYH rejected the subcommittee offer. The subcommittee wrote, quote, it was impossible for us to use the name TCBC for the new club because AYH owns that name, unquote. HBC and some on the subcommittee who were still also with TCBC, I know it sounds strange, immediately began recruiting TCBC members to join the new bike club. HBC already had cash in the bank, a PO box, a website, and LIB insurance for every club member. The new bike club, HBC, began operations on November 1st. Quote, the new bike club for the new century, unquote. So it was very confusing. And it was, as the saying goes, time to pick a side. Some of us had to make very hard choices. Stay with TCBC and believe we can negotiate a separation agreement, or split off and join the new HBC. I have in this pile, for some reason I kept it, a letter written to me personally from one of the HBC organizers saying, I sincerely hope you will eventually join us. We are moving ahead and the door is always open for you, me. So that was nice. And, you know, I don't remember that period that well anymore. I've tried to black it out, I guess. But as you know, I decided to stay with TCBC and I've never regretted that decision. But try to imagine, some of these were people I knew well, friends, been on trips with, been to many meetings with, been to their houses. We're done. It was over. Since 1999, basically no contact with any of these people again. If they split off, that's just the way it's been. And it's been sad and strange. So is it possible that the subcommittee deliberately blew up the negotiations so they could start HBC? In reading this information again in the last few days, I would say it's possible. And do you see the irony? Some of the same people who led the split in '93 led the next split in '99. Hopefully they got what they wanted. And yes, HBC is still active today. It's smaller than our bike club. I want to add that during this time, John Ridge was the longtime executive director of the council, who I considered a most reasonable person, always enjoyed working with. If you couldn't negotiate with John, who could you? John retired a few years ago. So we split, and with the HBC group doing their own thing, our bike club was able to work out a negotiated agreement with AYH at our annual meeting that November by a convincing vote of 93-1 at my local Roseville Skating Center. The motion to separate from AYH was approved. Becoming an independent nonprofit corporation took a few months, jumping through state and federal hoops, wading through IRS paperwork, getting insurance matters settled, writing bylaws. The president of our bike club through this difficult time was Julie Tim. And we are moving up to, after we got these things worked out, moved up to March of 2000. We made it official at a membership meeting. We approved the new bylaws. Also, we elected our first TCBC board of directors because under AYH, we never had our own board. It was always called the operating committee. And I'll just hit them quickly alphabetically. Our first board of directors. So these were very significant names, certainly back then. Tony Antonison, Annetta Bray Wagner, Karen Bryan, Carolyn Caswell, Kathy Duckenfield, Dave Eric, Pete Hawkins, Tony Stifter, and Daryl Zern. I would say two of whom I just listed are still active with us. Pete was selected by the board as our first president, and TCBC was independent at last. It was a separate 501c3 nonprofit corporation. Members no longer needed to pay fees for date rides. Everyone taking part on rides was covered by LAB insurance. which we still have. And the bike club has since then been guided always by the board of directors. We have never had an executive director. That's the hard stuff, and that's the most of what I'm gonna say. I'll cover much less starting in 2000 after I get another drink. 2000, we organized a League of American Bicyclists rally at St. Thomas University. I thought it went great. Gradually, ride leaders kept increasing, and so did rides. By 2011, the club's membership was 1,963, 180 leaders leading over 2,000 rides. I mean, think back to when we were just a few hundred rides a year. Now we're up to 2,000. And that was after a split. So we just kept increasing. 2012 was our club's record year with just over 2,000 rides going, totaling 1 million miles. And 285 people each had over 1,000 miles. Seems like old times. Since then, club membership has slowly declined to 1,400 in 2019. Then that COVID arrived and the club closed group rides for health reasons from April 2020 to May 2021. We are rebounding as we can. And let's see, I'm just gonna hit a couple of the big rides. Weekend on Wheels. Here is our great Weekend on Wheels jersey, the hills of Wisconsin. Yep, I still have that. This is from 2005. This annual event started in 1981, quote, "It started at a meeting when we gullibly agreed to organize a weekend bike tour on the scale of Tomrov or Tazrov to offer for the first time a really big, really fun all-service ride in Minnesota," end quote, which was not a fundraiser like some other rides already happening. It involved a Saturday and Sunday biking from a fairly small town with accommodations, usually in college dorms, and group meals. That first year was 190 miles from Gustavus Adolphus to Gustavus Adolphus in St. Peter. For the first decade or so, it meant starting on the edge of the metro, biking to a destination town, and then biking back the next day. It evolved into staying in a small town for 2 nights and doing loops around that town. River Falls, Wisconsin, with its infamous hills, was the most popular place as we stayed there 12 years altogether. The others most popular were Northfield, Winona, and St. Peter, where we stayed 4 years each. Attendance usually ranged from 100 to 250 riders, with the highest being 391 in 1991. WOW was started to promote weekend trips and eventually was replaced by many other weekend types of trips. The last year it was held was 2009. I may have been the only person to go on every WOW, I'm not sure, and now I guess we'll never know. Good memories, great food, great volunteers, and occasionally some hot dorm rooms. Let's see. Here is, okay. Here's one of the WOW hats. I found a bunch of them in the storage unit a couple years ago, so if you keep seeing this hat, it's not always the same hat. I have duplicates. Watermelon Ride, always held on the 4th of July. It started as a ride for people who didn't leave town for the 4th weekend. The first year was 1982, starting at Bunker Hills, a 50-mile ride called the Roman Candle 50. The next year, it was renamed the second annual Watermelon Ride. It moved to start in Shoreview, where the ride remained for a long time after. There were two 25-mile loops then, and often have been since. This ride eventually needed 60 to 70 volunteers the day of to pull it off. Then many of them rode for free. I was on the committee for many years, and it really challenged us sometimes, but it was so great to see so many familiar faces that day. Another challenge was that we had to move to Battle Creek Park for 2012, and the Twin Cities set a record high for the date with 101 degrees. Our big picnic lunch, especially featuring hot dogs and watermelon, was many times at Snail Lake Park, and who can forget the wonderful characters who worked in the Snail Lake kitchen. The ride's biggest year, with plenty of publicity, even on WCCO radio, was 770 riders in 1996. Here's my water bottle. Here's my wonderful cap from back then. Let's see how it works. Okay, it sort of works. I don't like it. I'm taking it off. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay. 2019 was the Watermelon Ride's last year. Even before COVID arrived, we had already decided not to continue the event due to a lack of prior volunteer commitments. Maybe it could start again, or at least a smaller event can be held on July 4th sometimes. I really enjoyed it, and I sure do miss it. All club rides. These have always been on Memorial and Labor Day weekends to celebrate the beginning and end of summer, usually on Saturdays. 3 or 4 loops have been offered on each ride. The first ride was May '94 to commemorate the late Paul Grissom, a founding member of the bike club, as I already mentioned. The next year, we called it the Big Picnic Ride. We tried potlucks for a few years with mixed results. The names were changed to Spring and Fall All Club Rides in 2004. Pete Hawkins and I have organized a number of them in the spring. Spring Ride has stayed in the northern suburbs mostly. The Fall Ride was moved to Minnetonka in 2010, where it still is. On good weather days, we often get over 200 riders, with the highest being 267 riders in fall 2011. Oh, I can see the end here. We're getting there. Hey, you think I forgot about Iron Man? Of course not. Here is the last great Iron Man jersey. Well, the back is better. 50 years. And let's see. Okay. Here is one of the great old Pete May Iron Man t-shirts. And yes, you're very patient. Yes, will you believe it? I still have an old pair of Iron Man socks. Believe it or not. You can't see it really very well, but you're going to have to trust me on that. Still good. Even wash them once in a while. It began in Minneapolis in 1967 with 27 people. It was always organized by AYH, almost always on the last Sunday in April. It got bigger and bigger, became the biggest bike ride in Minnesota for a while until the St. Paul Classic overtook it. The locations changed, the route options increased. The Ironman became kind of infamous for the occasionally slightly subpar weather, wouldn't you say? Now, I have analyzed this in the past. There were more good years than bad years. I guarantee you there were, but we sure remember the bad years more clearly, including a few snow years, like the 6 inches during the afternoon in 1984. Near the end of the Ironman, after 4 years starting in Lake Elmo, the last year under AYH was 2017 in wonderful Way Out Waconia. Of these last 5 years, 3 of them were cold and wet, and diminishing finances ended it under AYH. Free Bikes for Kids started running it in 2019 from Shakopee, took a year off for COVID, and it took place again last year. I can witness it's still a great event and worth doing. A few other accomplishments since 1980. What else can I show you? Well, we've had a bunch of awards over the years. Like we used to have these thingies. This was from 1994, just for getting over 1,000 miles. This is very nice. We decided that some of us were getting too many of these. So we eventually got into these kind of things to salute certain bicycling things. As you can see, very nice. Oh, I did 2,000 miles in 2005. Wow, that was a good year. What else? 6 editions of the Minnesota Bike Atlas, the most recent in 2007, as you recall. Here is this. That was our biggest one, I think. Wow, 144 pages. Whoa. 9 years with new club jerseys coming out. I've already showed you a few, and I'm got this one on. Go back just a sec. 1996, our own webpage, finally. 1997, we started Smart Cycling. 2004, we started Swap Meets, most years. 2005, changed the rules so that now only 2 people on a ride were required for it to count, 1 plus the leader. Also, outreach rides now got mileage credit, and that changed things a bit. 2007, a free dinner started being provided to those attending the annual meeting as an incentive. Hey, we hope to get back to that this year. Maybe this year, free dinner. Hey, it'll be great. Look forward to that. All right. Memorable and important characters. Here are just a few of many. Dr. Fixit, of course, whose identity I still will not reveal. Dr. Fixit is not any of us on this call tonight. That's all I will tell you. Bob Hoffman, longtime organizer of the Polar Bear Ride and the Paul Bunyan Double Century, famous for being sometimes late to events and sometimes even getting lost. In biking mileage, our 2 all-time champs with winning 9 years each, Katie Engel and Richard Miller. I mean, for most of us, we can't imagine winning once. How can you possibly win that 9 times? I don't know. And how about Bob Brown, our current and by far longest running columnist? We had a number of club treasurers, which is a very important job and a lot more work than you would think. We so much appreciate the treasurers, including the longest serving ones, Lucius Putnam from 1978 to 85, Doc Tony Stifter from 1997 to 2011, and Roger Fickbohm from 2011 until the present. Can you imagine that? In the last 25 years, we've had 2 treasurers. That consistency and competence and trust has been so important to our group. We have a lot of oh so talented volunteers, and many of them have been in their positions for a long time. And how could we possibly replace some of them? Hopefully not for a while. If I didn't mention you tonight, I'm sorry. I had to edit. It's what I do. And so as I conclude my written remarks, I thought in doing this project, I might find a new perspective on who has probably been the most significant member of the club over these many years. But my research just confirmed what I already knew, and some of you certainly know it too. The man who's been on the board more terms than anyone else, who's led leadership training from the start, who's been our insurance guru and risk management man, who's provided stability in, as I've described, very challenging times, who has done many more things over the years, and who is still doing what he does so well. Of course, I've already mentioned his name a few times tonight, because how can you not, in talking about our history? Ladies and gentlemen, a friend to many of us, Pete Hawkins. Thank you, Pete, for being such a friend and giving us so much of your time and talent over the years.
Thank you, Doug.
That's all I have for you tonight, written anyway. Thanks for listening and learning or relearning a few things from my point of view and from the newsletters. Are there any questions I might be able to answer?
So if on the questions, if you could just take one at a time and unmute yourself to ask the question, then please remute yourself so that the screen doesn't keep flipping around. Is there questions? I'll start off with one. Why was the hostel movement involved with biking to begin with?
That, Pete, do you want to
Yeah.
take that one? You were around a little earlier than I was. Wasn't that originally even back to the 1950s?
Yes, the first hostel trip in the Twin Cities was led by Frank Braun. They used to have a yearly trip to Europe to go hosteling in Europe. And there was a bicycle trip, and they actually took a boat across the big pond to get there. But the hosteling philosophy in the beginning was to get to the hostels under your own power. That was in their, I don't know if their bylaws or their creed or whatever, but so that was part of the philosophy, to get to between hostel and hostel on your own power, either hiking or even taking trains, whatever, but mostly bicycling. It really grew out of both staying in hostels and bicycling.
Thanks.
Yep. And Frank Braun is still alive. I think he's in his 90s now, and
Wow.
he's one of these guys who just as vital at 90 as he was at 60. He's amazing.
So I'm a little confused. When TCBC wasn't really independent then in 1993, it was just still part of the hostel movement, but yet was given some independence.
So can I speak to that, Doug, too?
Thank you.
So one of the big thorns in our side was that it was TCBC who ran Weekend on Wheels, and we ran the Ironman and Watermelon Ride, and we made quite a bit of money on all of those events back then because the participation was so good, and the money all went to AOH, and that started to really bother people. But then they really did want to get rid of bicycling. They considered the liability risk to be too great, and they wanted us at arm's length, and then they actually wanted us gone. So we just obliged them basically by leaving.
So then why the controversy in 99? If,
Well, I have to be careful what I say, because there's still some of the people listening here today are, you know, are friends, whatever, with people in the Hiawatha Bicycling Club. But basically, they split off and formed their own group, and they sent a letter to all our members that this is a new club, send in your money now. And that really was their move, but it wasn't the move of the people like myself who were still part of the AYH. And we're trying to negotiate a settlement. And I was in that on that negotiation, and I will go along with what Doug has to say about John Ridge. He's one of the easiest persons to negotiate with. And AYH actually gave us full autonomy when we left. I mean, it was a total separation. They gave us $10,000 seed money at the time, and it just worked out quite amicably with them, really, in the end, because we didn't come in with a chip on our shoulder. We came in to do some real negotiating, and it worked out really well. So
It did. But we had to go through a lot of pain to get there.
yeah.
A question about that. Prior to the split from AYH, was there any sort of insurance available to individual members, or did that begin once TCBC became its own independent entity?
I think Pete knows that better than I.
Well, my recollection is a little foggy. I remember getting the LAB insurance toward the end of that period, but before that, I don't think we had medical coverage for the riders. I think we had just liability coverage for the club, but I'm a little foggy on that recollection. But I do know that that was one of the things that encouraged us to go on our own, is that the LAB insurance had become available at a very reasonable price. And before that, insurance for bicycling was very expensive.
It was.
I have a question, and that is that it seems like one summer, a number of people racked up just incredible amounts of rides. I know Shelby Miller broke a record that stood for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about that summer? I mean, was anybody working? How could they ride that many miles? Just tell us about that, please.
Shelby is still working now. He was certainly working back in 98, although I don't know how he did it, but that was 1998. He and Lisa both set men's and women's new mileage records in 1998. And I don't remember specifically, it must have been a pretty good weather year all around. And obviously to do that, you have to have a lot of leaders offering rides to give you a lot of options to go on. And I think somehow, I mean, I've never had the madness, but sometimes the mileage madness just takes over, and you devote the whole year, and sometimes more than a year, into just having that be your peak year. And for them, it certainly was. So did anything special happen that year in 98? Not that I recall, but they just did amazing things. Of course, years later, when Richard Miller came along, he demolished all those old records, partly because there was more rides being offered during Richard Miller's time.
I think Richard, for a period of that time, his job was a handyman, so he kind of was able to fit his work in a little easier with his biking. And he didn't have a regular 9-to-5 job.
Yes, there has been brief discussion in the past a few times about having two different categories for ages or working people and non-working people, but I think that would be rather gray areas and hard to enforce, and I'm kind of glad we've never gone that way, at least not yet.
I think Richard retired on the young side. And I think that his handyman work for his friends and relatives has, if nothing else, increased in the last, number of years, back from when he was riding many, many miles.
He's also gotten a little older.
Oh, that too, yeah. But he still rides a lot.
Yeah.
Other questions? I've got one on the bike atlas. What exactly was that, and why isn't it being produced now?
I think we have one of the editors on the call tonight of the most recent issue, which I'm holding up again. So would Pat like to respond to that?
What was the question again?
It was on the bike atlas, Pat. What what exactly was it, and why isn't it being produced now? And I guess what was the target audience for it?
Where did I go?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. It was, the target audience was the public, and it was meant to provide routes for the public. I think there were various processes each time an atlas was produced, but the last time we had some rules where the ride leaders had to agree to have a route published, and it had to be written and vetted before we published it. And with the last atlas, we also had a disc. So there was a PDF of each map that was in there. There were a lot of people that worked on it, and it was a great project. I think a great outcome with that. And I think that if I recall right, AYH provided the seed money for it, and TCBC provided the work. And then we had like a 60-40 split with the profits of it.
I think so.
I'm not really sure why. I think technology increased and people were finding software mapping programs, and I think the need for something like a bike atlas wasn't as critical as the last year that we did it. There was talk about, reprinting the atlas, but we decided that that would require that each and every route be reviewed, revised, the leaders talked to, and that just seemed like a very onerous amount of work to do. So I think they served a purpose for the public. I think it was good PR for TCBC. And I think with the software that's out there now, it just isn't a necessary thing. There's a lot of work.
Also, since 2007, you would notice that there's been a number of competing books in the bookstores, because I do look at those sometimes. But back the 1990s and the early 2000s, we were pretty much it. But then it got to be more popular for other groups to publish atlases too. So that's another reason.
Yeah. I think
These atlas, oh,
I think
I was gonna,
go ahead, Pete.
I was gonna say that they were for sale in bike shops. It sounds like bookstores,
Yeah.
which are becoming less common. And I don't know how else they were distributed. Thank you.
I think you could order them online. I believe Barnes and Nobles carried them. And bike shops, I think, maybe carried them. So well, not online, but you could call in and order one. So they're all sold out, you know, they're all gone. So if you happen to have one and you want it autographed, I'd be happy to do that for you.
So they were our routes, the routes that we would do group rides on. That's what.
Yeah, they
Was it-
were TCBC leader routes, and the leader had to agree to have their route published. And some leaders did not want to have their routes published. And there was some work for the leaders too. They had to go out and they had to make sure that the route was still correct. So it was a lot of work. Steve Scott did all the artwork and he was the editor, and there were many, many, many phone calls late at night with Steve Scott and I trying to make this thing happen. And Steve Scott he was on a binge about something one night, and he, like at 1 o'clock in the morning, he went out and checked something out on a map because he thought it was wrong, and it got kind of wild there. But it was a great product. I think the club was really proud of our work there. And we made money. We made some good money on that. I don't remember exactly how much, but maybe close to $10,000. Pete, do you recall at all? I know we made good money.
I don't think we ever lost money on it. We did.
No, we didn't. We didn't
we
put
did quite
money
well.
up for it. We
Yeah.
never put money up for it. We just put up the work and then we got profits. So that was a contract with AYH at the time.
It sounds like something, now we use Ride with GPS as all our rides that, and we keep that really just for members. It might be something that we could sell access to or something.
So one of the big problems with publishing maps or even having them online is that, the streets change, conditions change. And so they're good for a while, but then they really need to be updated. So, we're going to be telling members now that they can go into our GPS library and download our routes, but there's no guarantee that those have been updated, the ones that have been in there for a while.
Yeah.
So there's a little, I don't know if it's the right word is liability, but there's some risk of, people being unhappy if you have a map that they felt was reliable, and then it turns out that something big has changed on it. So that's one of the problems with it.
Well, I always felt that there was some proprietary interest in TCBC and our maps, and it was a way for people to come ride with us, to become members, because we had such interesting maps and we went all over the metro area and other areas. And I really fought against giving away our maps to people and giving just the public broad access to our routes when that was a way to get people to join the club. So that was something I felt pretty strongly about when I was in leadership with the club.
Of course, the same issue with a paper copy, the routes would be out of date, maybe even faster.
Mhm.
Other questions?
I don't have a question, but a comment. I was away during all those transition years, and I hear people talk about the turmoil. And after hearing it described in detail, I have a much greater appreciation of the people who got the club to survive and thrive through all that. Thank you, guys.
And I would like to say that I really appreciate what Doug has done in pulling this history together, and I'm really glad that you've recorded it because he's done a really good job of in less than an hour giving a historical synopsis of going back to the 70s of the evolution and growth of this club. So Doug, and he also talk about longevity. He's been the editor since the 70s, and for one person being in one major role in our club, Doug is really to be congratulated for all of his hard work and consistency, and I think that we should make a big deal out of putting this recording online so that more people in the club can view it.
It definitely will be online on the TCBC YouTube site. So that'll be definite. I've got a few closing comments, but I did have one more question. Does anybody know how many jerseys there have been over the year, and does anybody have all of them? Could we ever display them sometime?
I think I have all of them. I wrote since 1980, 9 different years with new club jerseys coming out, and at least 1 or 2 of those years we had two jerseys. Remember, like the Andy Warhol one, which I don't have. So I would say at least 10 different club jerseys, and then of course there was, I'm not even including Iron Man and Weekend on Wheels.
Yeah.
I think I have most of them too. And when we had, what was it? We had a banquet, and the last banquet we had out here in Fridley, I had all my jerseys on display in the year that they were made. On the years that there was 2 versions, I only had 1, but I was missing 2 of them. But.
Yeah, I've enjoyed seeing the different ones over the years. So, well, we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Doug, for this really informative sessions. The recording of this will be posted up shortly on the TCBC YouTube site. I'll put it on the Bike U website or web page, as well as these forum entries. If you don't subscribe to them, you don't get the other comments. But that's where I'll put the link to the recording. Just as a reminder, on Monday, March 28th at 6 p.m., there'll be our next Bike U event. It will be put on by the Stamina Racing Collective, and the topic will be equity in bicycling. Much thanks to John Benda, who has coordinated the event. Be looking for the post on the Bike U web page and on the forum. I didn't want to put it out too soon, just because it gets confusing on which session is which.
Yeah.
And if you did not listen to the first session we had this year, called Simple Steps to a Cooler Climate, Taking Action from Your Bike Seat, please take the time to listen to that one. It's very good, and they have a lot of great ideas. And also remember Green Miles. So I also want to do a shout out to Jim Pedersen, who's really helped me set up things with the web page, Green Mile page, and also the Zoom recordings. So thank you all so much for attending tonight.
Thank you, everybody. I will tell you one more bit of future news. Now, how can I tell you future news? Do I have that DeLorean time machine working? No, but thank you, Pete, for what you said. It has been a long time, and I'm thinking at this point, I'm gonna try for 50 years, but I think 50 years will be enough. So give me a few more years, and I'll be one of those longtime volunteers that'll probably have to be replaced, as a number of us on this screen right now, but that's just the way of life. So I will try.
Great.
Thank you very much for all your contributions, Doug. We certainly appreciate them.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Doug. Great work here.
Nice job, Doug.
Thanks.
Nice
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, you guys.